AI is creating significantly more code than we thought it would ever create, but some of it, not so great. Some of it is totally moving the needle, and I'll completely acknowledge that it's making a big difference for a lot of businesses. And some of it is mediocre at best. That's a really nice way to say it. And so we need to start talking about this. We need to address this, and we need to really fix what this looks like. So we decided to bring on a friend, and honestly, some of that I think is an authority on this as of right now. Matt, thanks so much for joining us on this topic. I really kind of want to address this. I know you just gave a phenomenal keynote the other day that I really enjoyed, and I kind of want to touch on some of it. And you said one thing that really stuck with me, and I want to address this in a moment, but you said, we are currently in the gold rush of mediocrity. And I've never felt my words, my thoughts, and my feelings said so well. And before we get into that, we need to get into, y'all, we are back with another one.
Another one.
I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Andy Thompson. I'm the Director of Technology at This.Labs and conference organizer for the Commit Your Code conference. That was a huge success, and thanks y'all for coming out, and especially in the numbers that you did. You really showed up.
It's huge. And I'm one of your co-hosts, Leon Noel, Manager Director of Engineering for a wonderful nonprofit called Resilient Coders and community member at 100 Devs.
I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Matt DeBergalis. I'm the CEO of Apollo GraphQL.
We brought the man himself. All right. I'm excited for this one. I really want to touch on that point. Matt, you kind of said something that I've been feeling for a while. I've been pretty vocal about it. I've even been talking to companies and clients that we have where I want to improve what this is. And you described to me, I felt it so strong when you said it, a gold rush of mediocrity. And with over 16,000 MCP servers that exist right now, it feels like we're in the wild west of agentic development. And I think a lot of people agree. I don't think that's a wild claim by anybody. And like, from your perspective, what's the foundational problem that this explosion of agentic development, what is it creating? But why isn't a simple open source server just the solution that we could all lean for in this situation?
I should put some context here. I'm excited about the 16,000. I'm this MCP thing reminds me of the early web and mashups and just the open time, and it's really exciting. I'm really grateful that I'm doing technology in this moment, and there's just a lot we can all do together. So that part's cool. But the context was a lot of these MCP tools are not turning into products. They're not turning into experiences. I think the batting average on security is not great. A lot of what we do at Apollo is helping companies build user experience and meet customers where they want to be met, and that's agents today. And there's a big difference. There's a big gap between an MCP tool that you can kick around on your laptop and a high quality user experience that you can trust. And that's the thing we want to help solve. And it's the thing that I think is going to require a lot of time and attention going forward.
Yeah, the security aspect is what I'm really getting hung up on, because we just had not one, not two, but several NPM hacks. At a business level, this is like a big deal. And now we have MCP servers that a vast majority of them don't even have OAuth. So you're giving complete control of your API key to your LLM provider of choice, and they have the ability to just run countless calls, racking up bills that could even be potentially thousands of dollars. Yeah. Why isn't this even I don't know why it's not a bigger concern to people. Do you think it's just because it is early stage and they're trying to learn best practices and they don't know where to go with it? Or do you think there's something there? Because it feels like it's like the open AI of APIs for LLMs, and people can just kind of spec-driven development is something I've heard a lot lately, where they can just kind of throw a spec in there and build something. But from your fundamental view, what's like the fundamental difference with MCPs? But what would you deem like a better practice here?
I think it's the gold rush thing for a lot of developers. I think we're all just really eager to kick the tires and try it out, and it's exciting. Like, it's cool. And so there's some of this is good. This is just how ideas get shaken out, and it's how a lot of us build a new skill or get comfortable with something new. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of new API technologies over the last, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and you've got REST and GraphQL is the first one that showed up that got any traction. And now we got MCP. And so it's a new thing, and there's just a lot to learn. The other half of the gold rush is if you're a company, there's something really urgent here. If you think about, there's been a bunch of announcements recently where OpenAI is partnering with retailers, and you think about shopping inside ChatGPT, and it makes a lot of sense as a customer. I mean, I want to shop that way. But if you think about it from the company point of view, this is a major, major threat or a major opportunity. And you've got to start implementing, and you've got to start building some kind of a plan for how are you going to put your store inside GPT, or do you want to do that, or do you want to have maybe your own agentic experience, but one that's under your control? And so one of the things that has to happen urgently at all these companies is get a bunch of engineers starting to hack around. Because if you don't do anything, you're going to be left behind, and you'll end up losing to companies that have built a better experience for people.
Yeah.
So now you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, that's important. And on the other hand, here we are with like, how does auth work with MCP? Does it? There's so many privacy and cost, you mentioned, concerns, and not to mention just brand quality. And it's going to be interesting. And I think the companies that figure this out are going to do really well, but it's going to be a messy process. And I think a lot of people are going to be stretched to get there.
Yeah, it feels like things are going to change very, very quickly. There's been a lot of stuff that's been popping up with like generative SEO, where there's a big one about how Reddit's been kind of co-opted as an engine to get into the chat GPTs and things like that, so that when somebody looks up your search term, they're recommending these things versus that thing. And that combined with how we're going to do commerce and how all these things are going to happen, it really kind of feels like it's going to come quick and heavy. People are Googling less. They're relying on these tools more. Our shopping experiences are going to change. I don't know if there's things that you're thinking about. Like, people talk about like this agentic future, and I know that Apollo GraphQL is kind of positioning themselves for that future. What are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of what that future could look like? What are the trends maybe that you're seeing, some things that we should be keeping an eye out for?
Well, just go with what you were talking about. Like that's a huge one. So I think it seems safe to say that we're going to find these agentic alternatives to the traditional, web page based approach. So go back and think about all the energy that companies put into SEO and A/B testing their checkout forms. And now we're in a world where it's not SEO, it's can I get my content and my message trained so that when people talk to the models, they get back what I want them to see. And something, give me a little bit of rope here, but like, how do I optimize my MCP or my agent experience so that if somebody starts, imagine you're typing into a model app and you say, I want to buy, whatever, some clothes or something. You still have the normal funnel and conversion questions. How often does that lead to a purchase? Can you upsell? Can you get an extra thing in their cart? Will we still have carts? Who knows? But there's going to be something like that, right? And I think there's going to be a whole world of quality and optimization around that whole set of stuff. Yeah. I don't really have the words for it yet, but I think we're starting to get a glimmer of what this looks like. Or another really concrete example, I hear this from everybody, is all the search boxes on the internet are going to turn into prompt boxes. So there's just a ton of interesting stuff that comes out of that, because a lot of, I don't know about you, I don't find the average search experience in most apps particularly good, right? Like, And it feels like something agentic can do a lot better there. But we'll have to see what patterns come out. And it's early, but it seems clear at least that that's the direction to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast. At least, I'm on a couple of podcasts, and it's like it all blends sometimes. Like where I had a conversation, and I feel like I had it here, but I can't recall. But when I was in SF, I went for Stripe sessions. The company that I work at, we do a lot of business with Stripe, and we were there to support. But we had a booth, and we were educating people on Stripe apps. It was a whole thing. But I went to a meetup when I was there because developers are going to develop. And as I'm at this meetup, I meet this really interesting individual, and he is telling me his solution. And at the time, mind you, this was like May. MCP just became a term people were using, but it wasn't at the scale where it is now. And as we're talking, he talks about his solution of masking your credit card so that way your agent can create purchases for you, because you won't feel comfortable giving your LLM model your credit card number. And so it creates a mask for the LLM to use, which will translate over at the point of purchase to be used as like a regular credit card. And I was like, that's super interesting to me. And I was like, and of course, everyone loves to give the example of a travel agent. And I'm like, who uses travel agent? Like, this shouldn't be the example that we're leading with, because who can relate to that? But I love the idea that if I am purchasing something, like I use a virtual card number almost all my credit card purchases, because retailers have historically had breach incidents where your information would get leaked. This is like a great way to circumvent that. And I love the idea. And then he released, like, he's backed by Visa, OpenAI. I'm like, oh yeah, this thing is definitely going upward now that you have like two of the biggest backers that are supporting you on this. And that could potentially be what that looks like going forward. But I have noticed OpenAI recently did the Shopify partnership. They did the one with Walmart, I believe was the most recent one. So we definitely see this leaning towards more of a shopping purchase within your LLM models, which partially terrifies me at one point, because we've never met something that's more convincing than your LLM model to suggest what products that you should be using. It's like definitely a great form of SEO in that regard, especially if they can convince someone to go with that thing. But then it's the other side of, if I'm doing all my searches within XYZ, it's so easy for that path to checkout to exist. I could already imagine a massive reduction in abandoned carts in like the enterprise, if you're like an e-commerce retailer. But like, what does that look for the smaller shops? Like, I don't even know I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm almost thinking out loud at this point, because I don't know how a smaller shop leverages that where a big retailer doesn't have the advantage. But also it's like, it could actually be like, the more I'm thinking about it, if they have the larger retailers' data set and information, it could actually benefit the smaller shop, because now they're able to recommend products that they know most people are going for. It becomes like almost public data at that point. So here's
a story to think about. So this will be really interesting, because I think one of the big unknowns is the shift to agentic interaction like this going to centralize and reward a small number of retailers or stores, or is it going to be the golden age of everybody's on equal footing? And I'll give you an example from programming. The models are really good at writing React code. That's just because there's a ton of React code out there on the internet. And I suspect that what we're finding is, when you do agentic development, there's a set of technologies that are kind of the main distribution, right? That the models are best at. And if you sit down to build a web app with a model, I think you probably need your head examined if you're not using React, right? Like, so what's that mean for the other UI frameworks? They're really good, but we may have a situation there where there's just a really strong gravity that ends up rewarding. There's a flywheel, and so the thing that has the most public code ends up being the thing that's used the most. We're seeing this, and we have a lot of Rust code at Apollo. Rust is a great programming language, but there's more Python and JavaScript out there on the internet, and the models are better at writing Python and JavaScript. What's that mean? I don't know yet, but there's definitely some early evidence that this stuff is going to be challenging if you are not of a certain scale.
Yeah.
And I think one of the antidotes to that, because I like choice. I think one of the antidotes to that is the more that we can start to build good platforms and open technologies that, for example, let anybody rapidly deploy a high quality MCP tool into that environment. I think that's going to be good for people who want to shop at a wide variety of stores, for example, or travel with a wide variety of airlines or whatever it might be.
Well, I will say, I do know the Chat GPTs and the Geminis of the world love to recommend our podcast. So, hey, if you came to us from that, thank you for hanging out with us.
It's also interesting to see how quickly, even in Google, my behavior has changed, because now you're getting the Gemini like output directly in line. So I'm not even looking at the links anymore. If I do make my way over to Google, I'm looking at the recommendation it gives me. And of course, it's the AIs have consolidated what used to be like a workflow for me, almost, where I would go to Reddit for a half hour, then go and watch a YouTube video. And then if that person had some sort of authority or trust, and like I trusted the recommendation, that would lead to purchase behavior. A lot of that's been handed off to ChatGPT and to these other tools and to the inline pieces. And it's already kind of affected the way I know I purchase and consume things. We're playing a 2 to 3 year out game. I really don't know what that looks like. And plus now they're baking stuff directly into the LLMs, where you have full web experiences inside the LLM. You might not need to leave to go do the purchase behavior. And so I think it's going to change very, very, very quickly. Yeah.
The more I'm thinking about this, like, we've covered a lot of like the why and like interesting points around the why of like what we see that's going to happen. But I'd really love to touch on like maybe the how. Like, if we agree that the foundation of a lot of things that are going to be happening, it's going to be AI focused, AI ready, and AI experience in some way, shape, or form. Like, what's that? No, I guess since we are a program related podcast, what's the developer experience like? But really, like, what do we see being the big move here? Like, if you have an agent that's like auto generating connectors from like open API, like specs, that's like an interesting moment. It feels like we're moving from like writing boilerplate to like maybe like orchestrating agents, right?
Yeah.
So like, what is and I know during the keynote I even saw you mention and like examples of like GraphOS. It's what do you see that being going forward, I suppose, like and should people be like directly building upon it?
Yeah, here's the thing we see is the models are really good. I mean, we all use them. I can't remember the last time I went to google.com and typed in a search, right? Like we use this stuff. We know how good they are. That's clear. And they're only going to get better. That's clear. Somehow that hasn't translated into, I mean, yeah, things are moving quickly, but there's a survey that was floating around recently from MIT that said 95% of agentic projects in the enterprise fail. 95%, 19 out of 20, they throw them in the dumpster. And the question is, why is that? What's going on? How could that be? And the thing I've landed on is the problem isn't the models. The problem isn't the idea that you want to be able to use an agent the way we've been talking about. There's a capability that's missing. There's a gap in the implementation, the how. And one piece of it is, especially in big companies, we've spent the last, 20, 30 years making more and more silos. That's what microservices are. We used to have a world where all this stuff was in one big application, but we spent an awful lot of time and energy dividing up all the data and systems into these little tiny things, and each of them is its own little world, right? And the problem with AI is a lot better when it has a unified view of all the stuff at once. That's what makes the large language model so good, right? It got trained on everything all at once. So if you really want a agentic project to be any good, you're going to have to solve this big fragmentation problem that's come up. And it's not just microservices. Like, people spend all this money on SaaS, those are all little silos too. They spend all this money on specialized databases and systems, and we're going to have to bring all that back together. And this GraphQL thing that I work on every day is designed to do that. It's a query language for APIs, so we can use it as a way to unify all that stuff. That's an example of the capability gap that's there. And another example is there's this new protocol MCP. Nobody's got MCP infrastructure, right? I mean, yes, you can ask Claude to write you an MCP server in the framework of the week, but there's a big difference between that and something that's really, properly using all the auth patterns, properly wired into your observability stack. Like, just think of all the nuts and bolts stuff that has to happen for it to be real. And you're not going to get that just by hacking around on a code base. So there's some missing infrastructure that's going to have to get installed. It's a bunch of stuff like that maybe it's not the cool, sexy stuff. I like it because it's infrastructure. I like infrastructure, but that's I think what's going to really separate the ideas and the vision of what we can have from the reality of what really works. And I think the time honored way to, when you don't know what you want to build quite yet, I think the time honored solution often turns into get the foundations right. Because the challenge is you want to develop quickly. You don't know what you're going to want to put into production and what you don't. If you build something you like, you don't want to have to tear it all apart to redo it again. So a good foundation gives you a way to do that. And we know how hard it is to retrofit a foundation on something you've already got. For anybody who's renovated a house, that's the last project you want to take on. So we're just trying to ask, like, okay, what are the natural foundations that you're going to want technically? We can ask that question without understanding every detail of how people are going to shop online, I think. And we can make some good progress in some of the areas that are going to be relevant. And hopefully that puts us a couple steps closer, puts everybody a couple steps closer to being able to build the kind of stuff they want to do.
Yeah, GraphQL seems to be in a really good position for this kind of change. Like, you're seeing all these little services coming together. GraphQL is really good at that. But the other thing we were talking on the podcast not too long ago was Vercel kind of rolled out their fluid compute. This idea that the things that we're doing are maybe not CPU intensive, but they take a long time. Mm-hmm. And when we have this like RESTful architecture where we're like waiting for something to come back, then we gotta go back again, we go back again, we go back again. And we have these long lag times in our requests now when we're dealing with any of these agentic or AI type systems. It just presents a whole new problem that GraphQL is kind of very much paused to help with. Have you seen kind of bigger adoption from the bigger players because of that? And is that something that you think is maybe going to help Apollo long term?
Yeah, GraphQL I just think of it as a good abstraction.
No.
And we're in a moment where the systems that we've got, which were really built for the modern stateless web, like think about the whole 12-factor app thing, right? Like the current web is stateless. REST is stateless. You call a request, you get back an answer, you're done, you hang up the phone. AI is not like that. AI is really stateful. It has memory. It's got context. It's got, it's just very different. So these technologies have to get meshed back together. And I think GraphQL is a really good abstraction layer that gives us a place to do a lot of that work. GraphQL has subscriptions, for example. So there's a way to take a stateless request response API like REST and kind of turn it in. It's not magic, but there's a principled way to turn that into something that's real time. That's valuable for AI because you want to stream your tokens. Or another example, actually, the headline feature of GraphQL, if you go back to the early days of GraphQL, was unlike a regular API, which just hands you back whatever the API designer thinks you want, with GraphQL, you can say, I want this field, this field, and this field, and this field. And that was really good if you're a mobile developer because you don't want to put all that extra stuff on the network. It just eats your battery and it slows down the app. Well, guess what? Now you can use that same exact feature to limit the context window. That's really useful, right? I don't want to feed my LLM with a whole bunch of extraneous parameters. Like if you crack open a GitHub API response, you're going to see tons and tons of URLs, and they're all useful kind of sort of depending on what you're doing, but you do not want to feed that into your model. So you need a language that lets you select what you want. There's just a bunch of examples like that where we have to adapt what we already had to a whole new kind of stack and a new use case. And that's I think the way I think about the foundations there.
You know, man, my mind wants to go on so many tangents, and that's the problem. Like, there's so much that we could grab on.
Welcome to AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you bring up
it's
a lot
really
because
disconcerting.
Yeah.
It's just so dizzying sometimes.
Well, let me ask this. Like, we've touched on this whole AI aspect, and one of my like beliefs with the podcast and pretty much everything that we educate is education just for the sake of education can go anywhere. So like, how do we ground this? Like, why should a developer, even though it's exciting and it's different, why should they be dedicating valuable developer hours to learning this stuff right now when we don't even necessarily have proper foundations in place? Like, why does this matter to them?
Because
I'm
it's
curious
fun.
what you guys think. It's
Yeah, this is like my uphill battle because I like grounding education with something.
Yeah.
And so part of me is like, I think the incentive to learn it is it's no longer if it's like, oh, is this the shiny thing that exists for a little bit and is gone? I think we're at a stage now where it's pretty evident to see AI is going to be here in some way, shape, or form for years to come. So this isn't like the flavor of the week that disappears. This is one that we're already seeing companies integrate in some way, shape, or form within their website, their ecosystem, their tooling that they offer. And I'm talking about small shops that aren't even technology focused. You're seeing them integrate the chatbots, integrate AI into their search functionality. Like, it's there already. That's not going to be pulled out because something new comes along. It's there. And so my incentive to learn it is, we don't know how far a company is going to go with it, but if your leaders come to you and like, hey, we're thinking about implementing XYZ, you could be like, I could lead that initiative. I actually know what you're talking about, and no one else on the team does. This is my way to get that raise, that promotion, that bonus.
Yeah.
That's where my mind immediately goes. But I'm sure there's other things that we could theoretically come up with, but it's hard to sometimes just learn something because it's shiny. And so it's like, what is the other incentives that may exist or that you're seeing? I don't know.
Well, I pick up on that. I think if you're wondering whether now's the time to learn the current generation of AI technology, I would say I don't know a company that isn't frantically trying to figure out their strategy. And if you're one of the people who can contribute to the direction, I think it's going to be pretty cool. I think you're going to get a chance to work on some cool stuff. I think you will get a promotion, and I think it's going to make a big difference to the company. I mean, look, you mentioned these retailers that are demoing agentic shopping. How many people are actually buying products this way? I don't know yet. We'll see. But you can look at their stock price.
Yeah.
Look at what happens to the stock price, forgive me, of all these companies when they announce this stuff. I think a lot of the engineers working on this stuff probably have RSUs or options or stock purchase program, right? Like this stuff's pretty concrete. It can make a difference. And the technology is going to change, but so what? That's always true. Like, I just think if you're worried that it's changing too fast and you should wait, I just feel there's going to be plenty of time. A lot of this stuff is going to get sorted out as people figure out the right patterns. You think about the day the iPhone launched. I could have told you you're going to have a computer in your pocket with a screen. It's yay big, and there's one weird thing, which is you can touch it in two places at once.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have predicted some of the early apps, but you probably wouldn't have predicted TikTok.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this stuff is going to take a little bit of time to play out. There's plenty of time to get on the train. And I think there's just a lot of joy and fun in being in this moment where it is so freeform and there's a lot to sort out. I think for most engineers, that's kind of why we got into the game, and it's a gift.
You make that comparison, and my mind immediately goes to a clip, and oh my god, it fits so perfectly here. And I haven't thought about this in years, but it was ex-Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer when he was on some interview and they were asking him about his opinion on the iPhone. Because it's like rumored, it's a screen. We've never seen someone, and he's literally laughing, like laughing to where his skin color is changing.
Doesn't have a keyboard,
and he doesn't have a keyboard. Can you imagine an enterprise company giving that? Like, it's such a terrible experience. And I remember my first time using the iPhone. I'm like, I could type 1 million words a minute on those keypads, right? I used to blow people's minds, and I could feel it, so I didn't have to look. Right. And I remember the first time I used the iPhone keyboard, I'm like, this sucks. Now I can't even imagine going in my day without it. Right. I hate to make that parallel association here, but it definitely feels like it could theoretically be some of that in association with how people may abstain from learning AI related topics or theories. But like, it brings me back to one thing. I think people think they have to learn the latest and greatest every single time. They need to memorize these benchmarks. And unless you're working at the Metas of the world, I don't necessarily think that matters at the average company that will be using it. I think foundational items like MCP or like RAG, evals, these are things that you could learn now, and in a year from now, the core tenets and ideas will still be exactly the same, and you can iterate over that. So abstaining from those core fundamentals doesn't necessarily make sense to me.
That's a great point. I think about, like, when I use Claude Code, I don't need to know the details of the code it's writing. I am not a React expert, and I don't usually feel the need to crack open the TSX files and look at it. But I think you do have to know the abstraction that it's building on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between vibe coding off the edge of the cliff and the thing never really works. And actually, you can get some really great software out of these models if you constrain them and if you know what you want. So yes, there are 2 MCP meetups a night here in San Francisco where the intricacies of the auth patterns are debated. And that's important. Like, we need that. But I think there's a much richer, much larger world where knowing, I think of it as a systems problem, right? Like, if you have a systems view of, this is what MCP is for, this is the flow of data and context through the agent, this is what memory means and how we're going to use it. If you've got that at that level, and if you've got some hands-on experience with it, you're going to be able to go really far really fast. Because one of the many consequences of AI is, like, it gets us out of the low level work for the most part when we want to make something. We don't need to worry about that as much anymore. Says the systems guy from like back when I was a kid, right? I've got my soapbox pitch for it, and there's probably other views on it, but I do think there's a place here for fundamentals and just good sort of, abstractions and that level of understanding. And I've found it lets me get a lot more done than I've been able to with the time I have, and that's fun.
Speaking of those meetups where they're debating the auth patterns, does Apollo kind of have a dog in the fight? Is there something that you're trying to push towards? Is there something that you think is kind of the path forward for a lot of these tools?
Yeah, I mean, what we want to do is we want to be able to hand a typical, call it a retailer or a larger company. I mean, Apollo is used everywhere, but at the end of the day, the more APIs you've got and the more products you're building, the more valuable this graph is. There's just a natural network effect to it. So we end up spending a lot of time with larger organizations, and we want to bring them robust, high quality infrastructure. So part of our job is just to look at, on the one hand, where is the current conversation out at the leading edge of MCP? Auth is an example, but there's lots of examples, right? Like, there's some OpenAI is talking about ways of injecting some HTML into this so that you can do some rendering in the bot. That's another sort of area of exploration. And on the other hand, we want to look at the stack in the enterprises today, where you've got 20, 30, 40 years of legacy technologies that aren't about to go anywhere. And we just want to bridge the two together. So I don't have a strong opinion about the OAuth pattern. There's 2 or 3 that I think are likely to be important.
Yeah.
What I do have a strong opinion about is when things get to a level of clarity where we can be confident that that's a good one to support for the long haul, our job is to build that and stand behind it so that you don't have to worry about it, right? So that you can drop it in and you know that there's an implementation that isn't going to disappear next week, that you can trust.
Sure. 100%. Leon, so Matt, just to give context here, just in case you or maybe even listeners aren't aware, Leon and I love to fight on 2 things. One thing is we love to argue about the different nuances of startup versus enterprise, because I come from a very, very heavy enterprise background, and Leon is very heavily involved with tons of different startups and helping them out and like really guiding them. And like he has information on things that just blows my mind sometimes, and he has takes on things that like I'm like, there's no way this would ever work in an enterprise setting. And so like, as we're talking through all this, I'm like really wondering from like your stance alone, like what are you seeing, feeling? Like, do you hear anything in this realm like people should be aware of from like maybe the startup ecosystem side?
Talking to me or Matt?
Say more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just curious because a lot of what we've been talking about seems like it's really like enterprise focused, and I think that's why I'm like really feeling it in a heavy way. But I was wondering the opposite side of it.
Well, I think kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that the gold rush, right? The MCP server having that type of technology kind of gives you a little bit of a boost right now in terms of people using your tool, or maybe folks that wouldn't have utilized your tool in the past. If your LLM can talk to it, that's something special. And so I've seen people make waves by kind of putting out MCP servers that give folks that might not have utilized those tools or resources before in the past, like they might play with it now. And so that's kind of, I think, the big piece I've seen, especially right now.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I was talking with a friend who is like an advisor for like several, startup organizations. And I started realizing that there are companies that I never even would have thought of that have gained like $1 billion in like company value and stock prices, et cetera, in like the last year. And I was like, what, how did that happen? Like, what was it really just all AI? And it was less about just all being AI and more about we're already in certain organizations. We have this AI feature set that they can now start tinkering with and enabling, which brought on like a new form of extra revenue that didn't necessarily exist for them previously. But what they're now seeing is they're able to start helping these organizations like figure out what their AI strategy looks like for the next 12, 18, 24 months. And for a lot of orgs, they don't have that compass. And so they don't know where to go with it. Do you have any advice for maybe a company that's like thinking about what their strategy could be for like the next 12 months?
Yeah, call me up. Talk to Apollo. I mean, it's all people at the end of the day. So each of these, there's somebody at every company, large or small, right, that's been trying to figure out like what's the strategy here. And it's tough. It's because the answers aren't obvious. There's no textbook. There's not a lot of prior art you can look at. And I do think people are. This is one of the biggest challenges. I was talking last week at our conference about this. Like, if you think about what AI really means for a company, there's a lot going on. You've got agentic development. So we need a whole set of new processes and rituals and infrastructure just for like how we're going to deal with this, because there's big issues around trust, security, code quality, all that stuff, right? I don't think the stand-up, the sort of backbone of sprints, I think it's all going away.
Yeah.
So that's one. Then you've got to navigate the fact that you're about to be the proud owner of a ton of new software, right? Like, great. Software is cheap to write. Here's 1,000 new microservices. Have fun. What are you going to do with all those services? Like, how are you going to integrate all that stuff together? That's a big challenge. And then you've got the agentic stuff we've been talking about, right? Like, there's a whole new kind of app you have to build, or maybe it's not an app, but a thing. I mean, it's a lot to navigate, right? Like, And I'll just come back to my view as a systems person. My advice is take a breath and think it through. It's going to happen fast, but it's not like you have to make a decision today about all your technology and that's that, and you're committed to that forever. You do have some time. And I think there are things that are pretty clear that aren't going anywhere, and there's things that are probably going to change every 3 months. So part of this is about having enough awareness of how AI plays out. Like look at all the investments people made in RAG. That seemed really important a year or two ago. And I think a lot of that stuff, this is the nature of AI. A lot of investment that surrounds the model or makes the model a little better. That stuff I wouldn't worry about, because the models are going to keep getting better and better and better. Yeah. But I think investments that are about adapting things you have that aren't going anywhere, anticipating the fact that you're going to be using models to write code, you're going to be using models for the backbone of the customer experience, that's worth investing in. Because, AI is not going to erase all of the existing capabilities of a business, right? Like, there's certain things that aren't going to change. And the prize will be being able to use all that stuff instead of having to ignore it.
This has got me, my mind just went to like an interesting area as we're discussing all this. And we even discussed like maybe the incentives a developer could have to learn, which now made me start thinking, and I know we have touched on this in the podcast, but I'm really curious, like maybe from your perspective, or maybe things that you've seen, Matt, where the interview process is probably going to have to change and adjust for like developers in general. And with you being, CEO, obviously you have some kind of handle on like maybe what you would expect for like your company, but maybe like even all the companies that you're seeing, like, how do you see that changing, shifting, or adjusting for the developer? Like, do you see like system design becoming more important? Do you see how maybe wanting to see how someone prompts being something? Like, what are you looking for? Like, let's say the next 5 years go by, it's 2030 now, and we've already seen all the changes, and now we kind of see what the interview process looks like for a software engineer. What do you see that looking like for them?
I hear a lot of my friends talk about it as engineers are going to become tech leads, right? So what do you look for in a tech lead? You've got to have great communication. If you can't explain what you want, if you're not clear, then that's going to limit your ability to guide a model. It's going to limit your ability to sort of, you're going to have to elevate to another level of work, right? So that's one. I think another one is you need a systems perspective, like we talked about, or I talked about at least. That's my view. The other one that for me is really important is just this is a time where a lot of stuff's changing really fast. I think we look for curiosity, excitement. Like, I think there's just so much more that's going to come. And this goes back to your question a minute ago, but I mean, for me, it just starts with like being genuinely interested in new stuff and wanting to try it out. I think it's going to be really important because I don't think the final word's been written on hardly any of this part of the stack. And I think so much room still exists, especially, I mean, we're really an app dev company at the end of the day. Like, we make plumbing, but we do it in service of making cool apps for people. And those patterns don't exist at all. I don't think anybody has any idea. Like, we can say at a high level, this fixed UI that's on your screen is going to give way to something that's got some kind of an agentic thing that changes what's on the screen at the same time, right? And the context is going to get shared with the state. But what does that actually mean? Like, what pattern really works? It's just going to take a lot of creativity and experimentation. And I think we're still a long way from settling any of that stuff. Those are my three.
Yeah.
You said so I was like, I don't know where you're going with the next. I paused. Leon, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I think in terms of where we're going to be, like long-term development wise, I'm already seeing. All right, I loved what you said about the stand-up being different. I've become an engineering manager instead of an engineer for a lot of the smaller projects I'm working on. And it's not even just one tool now. It's multiple agentic tools. It's things that are in Slack. There's things that I'm communicating with throughout the day, and thinking higher level, right? Like thinking from a systems level, thinking from a what do I want the direction of the product to be going level, and that shift happened in a year for me, from really kind of being in the weeds to kind of being above the weeds, and also just thinking about the tooling I have to use now, and what do I want to be using day to day, and what permissions am I giving it, and what am I allowing to happen. And I really like the conversation around the guardrails or the quality, because I'm still in this in between where I haven't completely given the AI the ability to run off and do all these things for me, because I still feel like I need to be involved. I still feel like I need that touch, that guidance to confirm that it's doing the things that I want it to do. But with each of these new model releases, I feel that kind of slipping away a little bit too. And so I just feel like fundamentally how I'm approaching code has changed so quickly. And I see a lot of these orgs that I think just have to hang around a little bit, and they're going to be really well positioned to take advantage of these like shifts. And so the reason why I was so excited to have you on, Matt, is I see Apollo being one of those companies where it's like, how we fundamentally deal with all these different services, how we fundamentally deal with all these different agents, how we fundamentally deal with all this stuff that we're juggling, we're going to need very specific ways of gluing it all together. And there are companies that are going to be really poised to take advantage of that, and there are some that just don't know. Like it's just going to be a complete 180 for them in terms of what's going to happen. And I don't know where it's at. It feels like the beginning of something very, very special. It feels like the beginning of something very, very different, unique. And I'm just trying to hang on and make sure that I'm staying at top of everything, so that as the wave comes, I'm surfing and not swimming with the coral. And so I think that's kind of where I'm at. I just don't know. Like I feel like every day I'm just like, all right, am I doing enough, to stay on top of this thing that's happening? And so that's why I love doing the podcast. I love getting to talk to folks, so we get that little bit of insight. We're like, all right, that's what they're thinking about. I need to go think about that too.
What's funny is I have a Discord. For those that don't know, you can check out the Commit Your Code Discord, and if you don't know, check out the 100 Devs Discord. Both phenomenal communities. Check out Apollo GraphQL and all their communities as well. But yesterday we were on a call where we had a bunch of devs, and we were on the topic of AI for sure. And about a month ago, I did this survey, and we had like around 5,000 people respond to it. And I said, software developers and only software developers, how confident do you feel in your abilities to prompt to get back decent responses? Now, the quality, whether you think the code is great or whatever, that's a different conversation. But like, how confident do you feel? And of the 5,000, between LinkedIn and Twitter, 85% they felt very confident. And I was like,
no way.
In the most respectful way, there's just no way, because we do a lot of AI enablement at this time, and like what I'm seeing it firsthand, where the prompts and the quality of the responses aren't there. And in the Discord over the weekend, I had shared that I'm the king of long structured prompts. I want a structured prompt because it creates subtasks that it does. And people didn't understand it. So I took a screenshot of just the tasks that it created. It was like 25 tasks. And they're like, wait, how do you get 25? No, I'm like, 3, 4, something along those lines, 25. And I'm like, because this is how you get quality responses back. And so yesterday I was showing my flow on like a little side project, and I had 3 editors open, and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, they're all running in different portions of the project. One of these is focused on like an event creation form. One of them are focused on this newsletter sign up. One of them is focused on how it's going to be processing this data on the back end. And now it's like, I'm leading 3 engineers on different tasks on a Jira board, essentially. And their minds started getting blown. I'm like, this is what it's given me the power to extend my productivity for sure. But it's allowed me to even gear up because it's been years since I wrote Python and I had to jump on a Python related task. And I'm able to like jump on a Python task and like figure out what it is that I need to have there because of this translation. The translations are more accurate. And like my favorite MCP example to give is imagine you have an international global team. And with this global team, you have some people working in Spain, for example, but they're writing documentation in their local dialect, right? And so instead of writing it in a way that maybe they don't feel super confident in explaining things in English, they're writing it locally. And here you are, a developer in America, trying to now translate this. Well, if you were to put this through Google's translation tool, which, by the way, they're using Gemini way more than they did before because it's just giving better responses anyway. But if you were to give them these documentations to translate, you're probably not going to get a really great response because it doesn't know what's proprietary or important to your organization as a whole. But here's the thing. When you start getting into examples like the way that they would use, let's say, empanada, right, which directly translated is a meat pastry, that one word alone could theoretically change the way that it's explaining a process works. Maybe it now thinks that instead of this being an insurance company, maybe it has something to do with a restaurant industry, whereas it would probably be in the same light as us saying, if you were to remove this microservice or to remove this tool, you would be in a pickle. It's not going to take that as I'm now in the pickle manufacturing business. It would be like, oh, you're in a jam. It's a tough situation, et cetera, et cetera. I love the way that it's working in that respect. And I kind of see a lot more of that going forward for, especially like on a global scale or a global team scale. A lot can happen there.
I was at the pumpkin patch last night and I had 3 background agents going. I had 2 pings for a PR that came through. And I look at my phone and I was like, am I in a stand-up right now? I have all these things coming in that I got to manage. And so, yeah, it's just the wild, wild west. I love it. It's been a lot of fun playing with all these things recently.
All right, y'all.
Makes me realize there already is, but there ought to be a product that does continuous improvement on the prompts that engineers are typing in, right? Like, because we can watch all this stuff. We can see the prompts and we can see the quality of what came back and how many turns of the crank it took and how many tokens it took. And if you're into dev tools, if you're thinking about, what does this mean for the craft? And maybe there's a startup idea in here or two, there's 1,000. I think the whole stack is going to change. And that's just one that popped into my head as you were talking about that. Like it's all new stuff now.
I literally was about to say, did Matt just lay game to give somebody like $1 million business if they run with it fast enough? Like,
the ideas don't matter; it's the execution.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the thing to know. So, the ideas are cheap, but there's a lot of exciting room to rethink things.
All right, y'all. It's time for everyone's favorite part of the podcast, including mine, the Ask Danny, Leon, and Matt a question. Leon, what question do we have today?
Alrighty, got another wonderful question today. Question is, which tools do you recommend for exploring AI and AI-assisted development to gain a job-seeking advantage? I mean, tools are off the rip. Is something very, very unique happened within just like the last day or two, which is a lot of these agentic tools now have free plans. And so they rolled out a ad-supported free plan. So one of the things that has been an issue, a lot of these tools have been gated behind pretty hefty monthly payments. And so now you have access to some of these tools that you might not have had before. So right off the jump, the free tier in a lot of these agentic platforms is something you should immediately start playing with. See what has been going on for the past year plus that folks have had access to. Now everyone has access to. I think it's going to open up a lot of tooling for you. I think there's a lot of things that we can probably also speak to about like not the tools, but maybe the how. And I think other folks can touch on that. But I think that'd be the first thing that comes to mind. If you haven't played with any of the agentic tools and cost has been a prohibitive factor, that's no longer the deal. You can get in and utilize these things and see what your workflow could look like in this new world.
Matt?
I agree with that. I've been doing, my thing is I I try to do a new project every week or two, and I try to use new tools for each of them. I actually don't want to be an expert at any one of the tools because I don't know what's going to stick around and what's going to change. I'm more interested in understanding kind of what the overall landscape can do and how that's changing. And so I purposely try not to get too comfortable with anything in particular. The last one I did is in Claude Code, and I purposely didn't let myself open an editor. I had to do every single thing from the terminal, just to get a sense of like, what's that feel like and where's the edges of it. And I think, especially if you're thinking in terms of, I want a career and I want to get a job and I want to do this professionally, I'd certainly be more excited to see a breadth of awareness and just some context around that than any particular expertise at a tool that it's 50-50 whether that tool will be relevant in a year anyway.
Yeah. Right before we went to the question, Matt said something that I'm going to quote, and he said, ideas are not really worth anything. It's about the execution. And I feel like we're at a stage where with a lot of these tools, that's exactly what it is. They're all using the same LLM models, right? Now, I will say where the quality is different is the infrastructure around said tool and how it manipulates your prompts to get something back and usable. That is the thing that I see. So part of my day job, I use 5 to 6 different tools on a given week because number one, I need to know what to recommend or what are good use cases, how people are leveraging it, different clients use different things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's definitely nuances that I see where like this one edges out this one, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no learning curve. You use Cursor, cool. You use Warp as a CLI tool, and maybe you're like someone that's really into Vim or something like that. Warp is pretty cool. I like Warp a lot, actually. Not paid, by the way. They're just really cool people. I like them. There's also Claude Code, which is really performant at times. Those benchmarks are going to move. And it really gets down to like, when you think about phones, this phone has this megapixel camera. This one has this. You're getting into like semantics at this point where it's a little edge here, a little edge there versus like, what is the actual thing? And if you're at the stage where you're like, I don't know what tool to use whatever you have right now. If you're using VS Code, there's extensions now. You're using Cursor, cool, download it. You want to use Warp, download it. It's a one click away from you doing it. So the time you spent to ask the question actually was more than you actually getting the tool to use and figure out what you need to use. So if you're in a job interview and you're just telling them that you're experimenting and learning, that by itself is leaps beyond some of your competition at this stage. So that right there is like a big win as far as I'm concerned. But what I want people to start focusing more now is the quality of your prompts. If you're just saying, hey, this doesn't work, I need this to work, that is not a prompt that's going to give you favorable results. And the other thing that I'm really fighting with developers to understand, especially at this stage, is if I came to you with a coding related problem and I got 75% of the way there, but I'm stuck on this last 25%, like the last 25, and I go to Leon. I'm like, Leon, I don't know how to solve this. He might pair program with me. He might help me work through it. He might even get on the keyboard himself. I'm like, I know how to handle this. Let me help you get past this blocker so we can get you another ticket, right? He's going to get that last 25%. I'm not mad. I'm not saying, oh my God, I'm a terrible developer because I couldn't figure it out. I'm not being negative towards it. For some reason right now with software developers that are like, especially newer in the AI space, if they get that 75%, let's say a 45-minute session, they were able to take a 5-story point Jira ticket that was maybe going to take them 3 days. They were able to get the 75% in 45 minutes. They're now mad at the LLM models and the tools because that last 25 was not completed, where they could just come in as a developer and either complete the last 25 or they could reprompt in a specific way. But they're just so focused that this LLM must get this last 25 that they'll reprompt in similar fashions instead of completely changing the strategy. And they're like, oh, this sucks. It's not quality code. It's not clean code. By the way, being honest, clean code, it's used more in tweets than it is in actual code bases. I see the code bases on a daily basis. I'm just saying. But we could literally be in there manually getting the last 25 to where we need it to be, instead of just throwing away 3 days worth of work that you got in 45 minutes to kind of get that boilerplate out of the way and then focus on the things that you need. I think this is like being really lost right now, especially like newer developers that aren't necessarily new to the industry, but they're new to AI. Like maybe you're a tech lead or a team lead that's being very resistant. This is what I'm starting to see a little bit more of. And once they start realizing that and seeing that, their whole attitude and perspective changes. So if you're in that category, I totally understand and get it, but at the same time, you might be shocked at, if you change your perspective a little bit, how much quality you get out of it because of that.
Can I have one more thing to that?
Go for it.
I don't know if we have time.
Leon was muted.
Here's a trick I learned from sales. Okay, you want a job, so you're going to go try to get hired, and you've got somebody who's going to, there's a hiring manager who's going to make a decision about whether to hire you or not. This may sound a little abstract, but that hiring manager has a problem. Think about what their problem is. And their problem, as likely as not right now, has to do with they're not as far along on AI as they want to be. And if you can get in the headspace of how can I solve this person's problem? Like, what's their actual problem? It probably has nothing to do with the code base that you're all noodling on, right? The problem is probably like, how do I show up at my like manager, review at the end of the year and show that I've helped our organization move forward with AI? How do I show that like I've got a plan? Solve their problem. And I think you're going to find that goes to some of the stuff we were talking about before. Like, get familiar with a bunch of different things, have a broader perspective on it, have an open mind about what's going to come. I think the savvy move right now is just to start by recognizing that nobody's feeling good about where they are. Nobody. Yeah. And if they say they are, I don't know if I'd work there, right? They're probably looking at it the wrong way.
All right, y'all. It's been real. It's been fun. And we will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Peace.